Welcome to part 4 of the RLD Basics tutorials. In this video, we're going to be covering calculations. If you're interested in how we got here or any of the other stuff that comes before this, go ahead and check out our part 1, 2, and 3 on our website or YouTube channel. All right, so last time we focused all on this data panel, and this time we're going to be focusing on calculations. So we looked at data sets and field management. This time we're going to look at calculations on the left here. So what are calculations? Well, calculations are a way to get more information out of your data that someone's put in a form. So to put that a little bit more simply, it'll let me count the number of buttons they clicked, or maybe look at the average amount of time that they spend on activities, or look at the percent of time that they clicked a button on the interface or selected a certain option. All of those things, they aren't explicitly in the form, but your calculations let you get them out of the form. So let's go ahead and start. Our calculations are all organized by tab. They're just a way to organize them before you get into more complicated stuff. So we're just going to name it tab 1, just to help us organize and know where all of our calculations are. All right, so immediately you'll notice this is very similar to a lot of the other stuff we have. This little area in the middle is where all of our calculations are going to be, and you'll notice the name and operations. Those will show up as we create new calculations. There's also a search bar here to search through the calculations on this tab. And then there's group by. We'll be getting to this a little later, so don't worry about it for now. On the left, there are fields. You'll notice all of the fields that we created in our form in part 2. You'll also notice calculation fields. This will end up getting populated as we create new calculations, and this will allow us to add calculations into other calculations. On the right, we have all of the things that allow us to make our calculations do math and do all the things that we might want to do with our information. So we have our basics, things like addition, multiplication, division. We have logical operators like and, or, as well as comparisons like greater than or less than, equal to, not equal to. We also have things like number, text, and parentheses to help you organize. All right, so let's get started with creating a new calculation, and then we'll get into these functions that you see over here. So this first calculation, I just want to go ahead and instead of having the time in hours for the activities that people have done, as you might remember we did in part 2, I would like to get the minutes out of that. So let me go ahead and name this minutes time spent. Very cool. And let's start by dragging in time. So we know time is in hours. So I'll click it, drag it. You'll see this highlight yellow, meaning it's the first thing I'm going to drop in the operation. So I'll go ahead and let go. And you'll see time is on here. I can go over it. It highlights yellow. I can even get rid of it if I want to. So let me drag it back in. All right. And now we want to multiply time, which is in hours, by 60 to get the number of minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and take this multiply and drag a number over here. You'll see the little arrow pops up when I'm dragging something in. It lets me know where it's going to land. And then if I click in here, backspace, and then type 60 and click enter, there we go. Now we have our minutes of time spent. We'll be looking at this calculation in the next part when we go into tables. For now, just trust me, this is actually working, and when people go look at your graphs and tables, it'll calculate this for them. So now we have a minutes time spent in this calculated fields that I pointed out earlier. We can actually use this in other calculations. So let's go ahead and make another calculation, and this one is going to be the number of seconds of time spent. Seconds, time spent. There we go. And let's go ahead and drag, just like we did time, let's drag minutes of time spent into seconds of time spent. All right, there we go. You'll notice it shows up. I can get rid of it if I'd like. And let's go ahead, and in order to get seconds out of minutes, we need to, again, multiply by 60. So we'll go ahead and do this and drag in a number. Now you'll notice, before I drag in that number, the entire thing went red. I had this little error message. It's just letting me know that I have to have some function or a field of some kind, or a parenthesis, or a number on the right side of this multiply symbol. So I'll go ahead and do that. Grab a number and put in 60, click enter. There we go. Now you can imagine these could get really complicated. I could go ahead and instead of doing just plus 60, I could do a parentheses and go ahead and put in 60, or let's do 30, and then I'll drag in a plus and put in another number, and this one will also say 30. So you can imagine I could do a lot of things in that parentheses, but here I'm just adding 30 and 30 together and then multiplying it by the number of minutes spent. Very cool. All right, so now let's get into the text fields. So time and minutes and seconds are all numbers. You can tell by this little icon on the left of their token. Activity, however, this one is text-based. You can tell by the T on the left of its token. So let's go ahead and explore a couple of the things you can do with text. All right, so let's add a new calculation, and let's call this did work with a question mark. So I just want this to return a true or a false if the activity that someone selected was work. So I'll go ahead and drag in activity just like I did time before. I'll go ahead and drag this equals equals. So I'm saying, hey, what does activity need to equal for this calculation? Again, I get this error message telling me I need to put something on the right side. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's drag text. We'll go ahead and drag text, and I'll have it equal work. Click enter. All right, so now this will return me a 1 if the activity that was selected was work, and a 0 otherwise. So if they selected reading or spent time with friends, it will come back as 0. I can also add text onto my activities. So I'll create a new calculation called activities plus. And I'll go ahead and drag activities in here. And then on the other side, I'm going to drag a plus, and then I'm going to drag more text. So I can go ahead and put in, instead of a 0, let's put activity dash done. So this way, now my activity won't just be work, it'll now be work dash done. You can imagine that become really interesting, and we'll get into what that looks like when you start doing tables in the next video. All right, so you will notice one more thing that we did on our form is these buttons. There's a lot of stuff you can do with buttons, and you can find some of the stuff here under events. We're going to go ahead and we're going to do a calculation that'll check if people clicked more than one button for their feeling or their mood on our form. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new calculation. Name this clicked more than one. It's a long name, but that's what it is. And let's go ahead and count. So we'll grab count over here. Count counts the number of button clicks for any one of these button click fields. So I'll drag felt bad into it, and it'll count the number of times someone clicked felt bad. Now, I can also add in other fields as well, and it'll count those and add them together to how many were counted from the others. So if I do felt good, felt great, and felt okay, if someone only clicked one of these buttons on our form, then count will return 1. If they happen to click every single one of them, well, it'll return 4 because it got 1 for felt bad, 1 for felt good, 1 for felt great, and 1 for felt okay. And we wanted to check if clicked more than once was true, so I'll go ahead and grab this greater than or equal to sign, drop it right here, and then put a number on the other side that is 1. So if this returns more than 1, we know they clicked more than one feeling. Now, this is just the basics. You can imagine this gets really, really complicated, and you can do some really powerful stuff here. We are going to cover one more concept called group by, which I mentioned earlier in the video. So we're going to do this by actually creating a new tab, so that way we can keep things organized. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to name this group by tab create. In fact, I'm going to show you guys this little edit button up here. I can change the tab name in case I named it something I didn't like. So group by tab 1, change. All right, very cool. So now, what is a group by? Well, whenever you say, I want to get something per this, you mean group by. So an example would be, hey, I want the average revenue per month. Well, then you're grouping by month. And in our scenario, what we're going to be doing is we're going to look at the average amount of time spent per activity. So since I said per activity, I know that I'm going to take my activity and I'm going to group by activity. So now everything I do in here will take into account that it's per activity. So let's create a new calculation and I'll show you what I mean. So we'll name this one average time spent, okay? And in order to help us understand this one better, I'm going to click this little open button on the right here with the description. I'm going to add a description. The average amount of time spent per activity. There we go. In plain English, now when people hover over the field, they'll actually sometimes see this when they're in the graphs or the tables. All right, so let's close that and let's actually make this work. So let's go to statistics on the side. Let's grab average and put average into our operations here. Function average requires at least one argument. Great, we're going to give it that. So since we're already grouped by activity, we're doing everything per activity, we can just go ahead and take time and throw it into our average. Now, that means we're getting average time per activity. It's that simple. You can imagine this can get really complicated. I could start using my other calculations down here. I could start taking group by calculations and put them back over here. We're not going to cover that right now. We're just going to stick with the basics like we've just done. All right, so that is all the basic stuff that you can do inside of calculations. And in case it gets too much and there's too many confusing things, you can go ahead and search your calculations and it'll help you find anything that you need. In the next video, we're going to be covering looking at these calculations in your records, making tables inside of RLD.